Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's topic, SWADE. Let's talk SWADE, baby. And here to discuss it with us, we have Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
It's like a warm Savage Worlds coat.
And Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith, live from his hostage negotiation spot.
The terrorists are being quite kind to me. I promised you that torture has been ethical.
And if you're watching the show tonight, you want to follow us on social media at SWGM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook /SWGM Podcast. We're on Patreon. If you like what we do, throw us a buck, follow the show, participate. Patreon.com /SWGM Podcast. And certainly last but not least, on the YouTubes and iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. So let's get the ball rolling. If you're watching the live stream and you have questions about SWADE or comments about SWADE, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, we say SWADE. That's short for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. So let's go ahead and kick this pig and start the topic of conversation. So anybody want to carry through what we're talking about in the let's ask this. Do we want to follow a specific format and organization? Oh, wait a minute. I forgot for a second what freaking podcast we're on.
I was like, wait, don't make me have to think like something's going on in order. Let's just talk about shit.
Like we have an outline.
At one point, we talked about when SWADE launched, we were going to go back to the original format of this show and do like a chapter by chapter breakdown of the whole book. I don't honestly foresee this group doing that because we're all stream of consciousness guys. We'll get talking about character creation and jump to hindrances just because that's what we do.
Yes, we've grown since then.
We were having a pretty interesting conversation in the green room. Let's go ahead and just sort of like start the show off by continuing that a little bit for the general public.
Should we introduce that then?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed that's happening a lot is you get people making these knee-jerk reactions to the things they're seeing without reading like the whole book to see how everything kind of meshes together and how SWADE really is the stew that's way better than its component parts are. And I finally had my knee-jerk fuck that table flip moment with the latest version when they dropped the 2.1 and removed quick draw and created this new readying weapons thing where you can ready up to 2 weapons per round as a free action. And I had kind of this table flip like, well, wait a minute, why the fuck would I ever disarm somebody if they can pick the goddamn thing up for free as soon as they get to act? I gain no benefit from disarm now. And it's one of those where I have to force myself to kind of take that step back and go, I don't like it, but it's also not done yet. We haven't got a final version. Shane keeps saying, don't print it, don't rely on it. It's not done. So I'm going to take a step back and kind of catch my breath. But honestly, that's the first rule change I've seen in the book that honestly left me going, fuck this, I'm out.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether I agreed, but now that the more we talked about it and I read it, that's not a good change. That needs to be tweaked.
Well, let's say this: that's not a good change depending on how you play your game. If you're more a tactical player, that's not a good rule change. If you're more fly by seat your pants, screw it, a lot of hand waving, then it doesn't really impact you that much at all. Or it allows you to do a lot more crap in a high adventure type game if you're not having to spend actions to draw weapons.
I do think that the genre neutral portion of the rules is taking a back seat to the high action cinematic thing. I think we're seeing a lot more of that lean in the rules in SWADE than what we've seen in previous editions. And I think you're going to see settings that want a grimmer, grittier, more realistic I don't want to say simulationist, but a little more verisimilitude in their games, I think we're going to see more setting rules necessary to layer on top of the current edition than what's been necessary in the past to achieve that.
Yeah.
You know, like a Realms of Cthulhu today, I think, would be a thicker book just because there's going to be 2 or 3 extra pages of just setting rules to dial the game back, because they've definitely pushed it to 11 and broke the knob off.
Yeah. So let's talk real quick. Dustin's throwing up here something from Ruben. Go ahead, Dustin. Why don't you read that off? We'll discuss it.
Sure thing. Ruben Rubiera, thoughts on the core skills versus default setup? I know a few debates about certain core skills not fitting or wanting to switch, i.e. from Facebook forum, ogre switching persuasion to even stealth for imitation or intimidation. Yeah.
I just wait. I want to sit back and appreciate the moment of imitation ogres.
Wait. If I may. Umis, we're with guardsmen. Yes, I'm going to become a shaw.
Okay, this debate goes on and on and on. Listen, if we're talking ogres, if we're talking something from the bestiary, give them intimidation. I don't know. Go ahead, Dave. What was your thought on it?
Well, I mean, it's covered in the race creation rules. It's right there that for a certain number of points, you can take away a core skill, or you can add a core skill. That's already right there built into the game. If you need to tweak a race to make it fit what you want to do in your game, the rules are right there. They're just a couple pages away from where core skills are defined. I think the bigger question is, what are the core skills in your particular setting? And I think that's going to be a new version of setting rules that we're going to see crop up, because I could definitely say that if I was to say rewrite someone's Buccaneer Through Hell and High Water, one of the core skills that everyone would start with is boating, because everyone's a pirate. I mean, it's just that game so relies upon that thing. Everyone has at least some knowledge of how to take a ship to sea. Maybe they may not all be experts at it, but that is part and parcel of that setting. Just like let's take this to the other extreme. Let's say we're doing, Star Wars. A core skill in Star Wars, quite honestly, is probably piloting. Since now you've got people who have flying cars that they drive around on a regular basis. One, just getting around town in your airspeeder is a common knowledge role. But I honestly think piloting ends up being a core skill in that setting. So I think what we're going to see from a lot of licensees and even from PEG themselves is core skills. This is the default, the genre neutral version. And there's going to be a different list based on the setting you play.
Yeah. Same thing would hold true if you're running a modern military setting. Shooting becomes a core skill. Fighting becomes a core skill.
Yeah, if every player character is a soldier, there's certain skills they're automatically going to be required to have because they went through basic training.
I just want to sit here and bring up that common knowledge is a core skill. And we've always had core skills in the fact that we've always had a D4 -2 for anything unskilled. So I guess this is just answering the question of so many people that just refuse to use notice because it wasn't on the character sheet, and having to remind somebody a dozen times in a row that, yes, you can roll something that isn't there, you're just rolling it unskilled.
No, if you read the developer diary, I think that Clint put out about core skills, they talk about the fact that it's like, you as a modern person, there is not a single human being who hasn't at some point attempted to sneak up on a friend, a family member, or somebody trying to startle them when they had the hiccups, or just trying to be an asshat and get their wife to scream in the middle of the night in the middle of a scary movie. We've all done it, and therefore everyone kind of has practiced these things. So when you look at the core skills, there are things like persuasion, conversations like what we're having right now. are quite literally the bread and butter of human interaction. Everyone has at least some knowledge of how to get their point across. Everyone kind of has some knowledge about how to sneak up on somebody. The core skills just make sense. I think that, quite honestly, a lot of people are trying to say that this has reduced the effectiveness of the untrained skills. I don't think it has. I think the unskilled roll is still there for when you're trying to make a knowledge battle roll and you didn't take it. When you're trying to make a piloting check and you didn't take that. Like, it absolutely makes sense that you can try to do anything, but it also makes sense that there's some things that just being a person living in the time and place that you live in, there's going to be some things you just know how to do. And honestly, we used to say, oh, give me a smarts roll under common knowledge. Now we're saying, oh, give me a core skill roll. Or, oh, give me a common knowledge roll, and it's actually a skill that the player can spend points in to be better versed. That character is better versed in the knowledge of their time. A bard is going to have a high common knowledge because that's kind of what they're known for.
Yeah, so there.
Well, damn. Didn't mean to shut up the whole podcast.
No, I think there's a lot of pushback against the core skills and changing the point spread total.
Right, I think people are upset that they're like, I only get 12 points. But if you really look at it, you've got those 5 core skills at a D4 that you're not spending points on. So really,
you got 17. Shut up.
17 points. Exactly.
Yeah, you ended up with more skill points with core skills. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the evening, but I just did a thing where I built 21 different novice characters. In fact, I actually built somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80 novice characters in the last week and a half, 2 weeks. But I am here to tell you, you can get some really high skill amounts with a novice character with no advances because of the way that shakes out now. Core skills really do make a really big difference when you build to type. If you're building the bard and you want to give them, stealth and common knowledge, because stealth, common knowledge, persuasion, perform, only one of those is in the core skill. All of you're going to get 3 of those skills at a D4 before you even start spending points. That is huge.
Agreed.
Yep. I do like the way that they're handling smarts-based skills with the whole academia, occult, arcana. So now you're just like, you have an umbrella effect. You don't have to worry about, well, I have knowledge accounting, and that's only going to come up like maybe once or twice in an entire campaign. Now you have knowledge academia, and you're like, well, I do have certain knowledge in how these things work.
So when I first saw it, I was unhappy with the way the knowledge skills have shaken out this time. The removal of a umbrella knowledge that I then write a specific area behind seemed really odd to me. Like, wait a minute, so I can't have my character take a more specialized knowledge skill? But then when I looked at it, it's because, well, one, if there's this more specialized knowledge skill, it's probably going to be a setting skill that gets added in. Things like, obviously Guts is still a setting skill. It's going to get added into horror games. Well, so is something like knowledge journalism in a game where that could come up more often. But when you take a step back, in a game where I don't have knowledge journalism to rely on, well, I can take knowledge academics, and that covers my character being very literate and knowing how to write and having, taken the college courses that would apply to being a journalist. So by having kind of a default set of knowledge skills, you now kind of have something to build around. Where that's going to get funky is things like arcana or occultist in settings where there's no magic. Is occult just going to be like knowledge of mythology in a game where there's no magic? Or, how's that going to work out? And I think, again, that's going to shake down to that whole, we're going to have different sets for settings. But I think having kind of this is the carte blanche center throughput line makes a lot of sense for a genre-neutral system.
Yeah, but what about Streetwise?
I love that it got changed to a fucking edge. That is amazing. It was so Streetwise, for one thing, it never did what people thought it did. No one ever used Streetwise correctly in all the time I played Savage Worlds. I have never once had someone use Streetwise for their character to go carousing to get information without them wanting to twist that into their character already knew it because they were Streetwise, or they wanted contacts because they were Streetwise. It's like, no, you have to take the connections edge for that. Or, no, you have to have taken, a knowledge skill for your character to know these things. Streetwise is, I go and spend the evening out in the bars and come home with the information. So no one used it properly before. And now it makes sense that Streetwise is it's a bonus to the normal checks it takes to roleplay those moments and have the player actually try to use persuasion, intimidation, and taunt with the seedy underbelly. Now I get to roleplay Han going into the cantina and dealing with Greedo instead of rolling some dice and just narrating that as a Streetwise thing. Now we get to role play it out, and when you do make a dice roll, you get some bonuses because of that taking advantage.
Well, when we're talking skills and new skill changes, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The one thing that everybody seems to be latching onto as an issue: athletics. Well, wait a minute! You took away climbing and swimming, and what do you mean throwing is now athletics throwing? We got rid of throwing.
Nobody used those. Like everybody took fighting and shooting, and sometimes, like, if they got high enough, they would start taking climbing as an afterthought, as one of those like skills that they would spend just because. Personally, I love athletics. I'm glad it's there. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Right, and if you think about it, what's come through in the comments is that really athletics is like 3 skills in one, so you're still getting more bang for your buck.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't disagree with any of that. Where I come down on it is what I'm seeing from a design standpoint is I feel like they made this big shiny change and then really leaned into it. There's some things that are being turned into an athletics check that maybe didn't need to be. Things like there are people arguing that it should be an athletics check for the difficult draw of a weapon, which we touched a little bit on. The readying weapons rule now is if you're going to ready anything beyond the first 2, or you're readying it from a difficult location, there's an agility check. Some people are arguing that should be athletics. And that's where I think you're going a bridge too far. Is, yes, athletics is this really great umbrella term, but like we've said before, don't read too much into what something's called. Let's make sure that it's identified and has a very specific mechanic attached to it, because otherwise you end up having athletics rolls for your character to basically do everything, because they're moving about and that's athletics. They're jumping about and that's athletics. They're all these things that should really be falling in other categories can very easily get shoehorned under that umbrella. And that's where my concern comes in. I think it's a great change. I think there were underutilized skills that got deprecated and rolled up into one. So that's the first thing that it achieved. The second thing it achieved is it gave us a dedicated skill for doing certain things, like, what happens when a character wants to walk across the trap floor and has to step on the right poles at the right time. It used to be we were having to default to an agility check, but that didn't always feel right because, well, if I brought up a high agility, my character was just automatically immune to traps later on in the game. Whereas if I was playing the dwarven barbarian with a low agility, because he just wades into a room in massive armor, all of a sudden he's failing all of these despite being a heavily skilled-based character. So I think that it solves some other problems, but at the same time, I think that it's the new shiny, and the people who want to emphasize that it's good are leaning too heavily into it. And I think even Peg is succumbing to that a little bit, where it's getting one or two extra things that maybe it shouldn't be covering.
Well, and I'm going to point out here, I'm going to tack onto that. Dan Riley states those climbing, swimming, throwing were just possible point dumps that might get used. That's why they were combined, so you could more easily build a competent character. I don't necessarily disagree, but I think very few GMs, unless you're a dick GM, yours truly, weren't calling for swimming and climbing rules. They just weren't calling for them when in situations where they really probably should have. And it was like, well, nobody took it, so we never used it. So
right, and so now it's going to be easier to call for those.
Right.
Well, I think there's two sides to that. Really, there's the first aspect of it is, and we've talked about this on the show. GMs aren't calling for roles that use all of the rules. The underutilization of things like the old knowledge skills, the underutilization of things like streetwise and swimming and climbing and throwing, all of these skills that kind of got either deprecated or rolled into other stuff. It's a little pandering of Peg to say, well, instead of reinforcing that you should be using those rules, we're just going to roll them up into one thing. At the same time, you can't make people play a certain way. So right. you can't tell them, oh, so everyone is always leaving these skills out of their game. Well, we're now going to double down and force you to use them. That's just going to lose players from the game. So whether you like it or hate it doesn't matter. They had to do what's in the best interest of the health of the system, not just in how it's going to play at the tabletop, but how that interacts with what players are expecting. If players are expecting a fun game and they can't achieve that with Savage Worlds, they're going to go play something else.
Well, it's like finding a programming exploit in a video game and taking advantage of it, and the developers going, "Oh, wait a minute, we've realized that you've taken advantage of this. All right, we fixed that exploit." You have to give the community something to replace it. You just can't take the candy away for somebody who's got to use something. And I think Peg did an excellent job, in my opinion, with making athletics count for something by making it by tying it so closely to grapple.
Oh yeah,
that is a game changer in so many different ways. If you want to play a pacifist character, for example, bump up on athletics and just grapple the shit out of everybody. Just put them in submission holds.
Outside of that, it also changes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It also changes the martial arts edge to sort of make martial arts applicable. Like it switches the skill used.
Well, it gives you the option to switch. It doesn't. That is the other thing. Anything that does that in SWADE is not mandated. It's not like, oh, you have the martial arts edge, therefore you have to use fighting. No, the player gets to choose which one to use. So you can still make individual choices based on your character and the playstyle you want to go with. You might have taken martial arts just for that bonus damage, but still have a higher athletics that you do with fighting and want to use your athletics for those grapples. But before we get too far away from it, I do want to touch on something Dan Riley says. He says GMs weren't calling for those because they knew all the characters were going to fail abysmally, and failing is not fun. Fast, furious fun is the tagline he goes back to. And Dan, you're wrong. Failing can be fun. If your players are not having fun when their characters fail to do things, you suck as a GM. You're not narrating the game well enough to make it interesting to fail and giving them room to find fun in their characters failing to do something. Everyone knows the great moments that happen in a story are almost always the failures. Jason and the Argonauts, that entire story happens because the motherfucker fails in the beginning. The assault on the Death Star in Return of the Jedi, where they're creeping through the woods on the stormtroopers and Han steps on the only fragile branch in the forest and makes the loudest popping snap sound that alerts an entire fucking platoon of stormtroopers to their there.
The views expressed by Dave and Ruben Scott are not necessarily those of the podcast. Blah 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 blah.
I'm just glad it's not me talking about Star Wars.
I'll say this, Dan. When I don't necessarily disagree with you about why GMs weren't calling for them. I know that some GMs prefer not to be confrontational or not to insert a challenge like that to their players. I get it, but I guarantee you, if you start calling for more climbing rolls in your game when you're doing it for the right reason, guess who starts spending advances on fucking climbing rolls?
Oh, that is definitely part of it too. Is if you never called for a skill to be used, your players are never going to take it. If as a GM you notoriously never call for a climbing check, no one is ever going to take climbing because they know it's a throwaway. They know they're wasting points. Chris, you had a story about that from a con years ago where Landauer had done the whole quick draw thing with Shane at the table, and it was
that was actually a Landauer story.
But I think you're the one who told it here on this show. But it's this situation where he always ran the game a certain way, and it made an edge that Shane's character had completely useless.
Correct.
So the player at the table was left with a wasted edge, which is a lot of investment for a character. That's an entire advance. That's just not useful to that character because the GM's not calling for the rules to be used. And that's a thing that really does need to be. Like, that is you as a GM making the game not as much fun for your players by not utilizing all the rules. And Dan, I know you think that Peg's on your side, but I'm here to tell you, Clint has said multiple times, failure is fun. So has Shane. They are not trying to remove failure from the game, but they are trying to make sure that when you fail, it's because it's dramatically appropriate that you failed, not because you're stuck having to spread 15 points too thin.
Well, and the other thing, too, failure doesn't have to mean catastrophic destruction. It could just mean failure. And we've said it on this podcast before. I'll say it again because it bears repeating. When a character leaps off of a horse to jump onto a ladder on a moving train and fails the roll, it doesn't mean they slide to the ground underneath the wheels of the train or bisected and dead. It means they suffer a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises.
I just want to point something out from a psychological standpoint. Winning every single time diminishes the returns. It's an actual psychological principle that if you win too much, you will lose interest because you don't get the same kind of value reward in your brain and in your process. Winning is only as valuable as how closely related it is to how much you lose.
So there's a study that was done. Wizards of the Coast actually paid to have this done to find out what the balance point is for maximum fun. And they found out that if players were succeeding more than 70% of the time, they didn't feel rewarded for the choices they'd made on their character because they never felt like the character was being challenged. But if they failed more than 40% of the time, they found that the players felt like, again, they were just in a no-win situation and that nothing they did mattered. So D&D has now been, with 5th edition, they have very specifically dialed it in. So at every point when your character gains power, the monsters gain enough power. So there's always a 65% chance of success for everything your character does in that game. Now, that game is massively over-engineered from a Savage World standpoint. You know, Savages don't care about the level of tweaking and minutia that goes into a D&D game. But quite honestly, that's based on a psychological study they paid to have done at a college level. They had professors actually testing how often people succeed and fail, and how that was psychologically rewarding. We're at a point now where we have to realize that what used to be, oh, it's just a game, has now become the actual livelihood of adult scholars, scholastic academics who are going to make their bones on the psychological side of our hobby and how you can make the game better. And failure has been proven to be an important aspect of it. Otherwise, there's no challenge in the game, and you don't feel like you're actually playing a game. You feel like you're just sitting around telling a story where everybody wins.
Well, and I'll throw this one in here before we move on, just as a tag onto the end of this. GMs who don't call for roles that they know the players don't have on their character sheet when it's appropriate to the story, to me is the same style of GMing where, oh, well, magically in between each session, 5 days has passed and everybody's healed all their wounds. Oh, because, well, starting with one wound isn't fun because it adds a -1 to everything. No, your character got the shit kicked out of them. They won the battle, but they got the shit kicked out of them last time. They should have to spend at least a session licking those wounds. We shouldn't just hand wave that away, at least in my opinion.
Well, and interestingly enough, what will your character choose to do in the future because they're injured? You know, you're not going to just jump headlong into the fight with a broken arm. You're going to choose maybe to ambush the bad guy, or to go with a social interaction, or to use your knowledge to find out some weakness that they have so that you can bribe them, control them in some way, defeat that challenge without having to enter into another combat where you're at a -1 penalty to everything you do.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Dan. You just punched one of Dave's hot buttons. It's not fun to fail. You just punched one of Dave's hot buttons. I've got a few of them as well, but just bring out the Dick GM to me as well.
I gotta tell you something is that all GMs really should be spending some time in the head of the leader of the bad guys, and they should ask themselves this question in character: how do I stay alive? And sending expendable cannon fodder to exhaust and wound the heroes is one of the best strategies you can come up with. Because if you send wave after wave of stormtrooper or goblin, or if you set down traps and they have to eat food and they have to scavenge, it wears them down and they go into a fight with a penalty. So if you've got a game where your players are just walking through everything, then no, they don't need to be giving that whole 5 days to heal everything. They need to just be on a chase. And in that chase, they are getting exhausted in the process.
My favorite tactic in the mind of a bad guy and villain is to hire a very, very skilled public relations specialist to run a smear campaign against the heroes. That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, didn't Jib run an entire Deadlands campaign where the big bad was like a journalist turning the world against the player characters?
Like everywhere they went, boo! Like,
that is pretty awesome.
So we got a question here that I think is most appropriately answered by Jared. So I'll read it out. Basil Varian, who, thank you, we love you too. When are we going to do more actual play sessions?
That is a great question.
I did answer in the chat.
Oh no, let me go look at the chat.
You see my answer in the chat? I think I might have gotten that correct for all of us.
I absolutely, Chris. and what Chris had said, guys, is understand we are all fairly busy. All four of us are licensees. We are all for helping crank out additional products. We all four have other projects we have going on, both within Savage Worlds as well as within our lives. Like I'm buying and rebuilding a house. Jared just started another job. Dustin, I mean, let's be honest, the man has to take vacation just to shave his hair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the kidnappers don't provide me with razors.
So what have they asked as ransom?
They want
the recognition of non-gender specific pronouns for everybody.
yes.
Oh my god, I can't believe you went there.
They also want me to proclaim my love of the latest Star Wars trilogy and to devise a fun and universally accepted fantasy setting for Savage Worlds.
And they're giving him plenty of Earl Grey tea laced with arsenic to help him achieve those goals.
I've cut down on the Earl Grey and arsenic. That was my own path to genius.
I will go out on a limb and say it is entirely possible that actual plays will make a return to the channel, but it'll never again be an actual play once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's
just absolutely, that schedule was so insane and relied on the fact that neither Jared or I had other projects going on at the time. Like we had the free time to develop an actual play with all the graphics necessary to do it properly every 2 weeks. It just, it's a massive investment, guys.
Even at our low production values for that, it's still a production, and it still takes a lot of time to set up. But to answer the question, Basil, what would you like to see us run as an actual play? So let me put that question back on you. What would you like to see us run as an actual play? Go ahead and type that into the chat in response, and we'll go ahead and continue. I think we could spend the next 5 hours talking about SWADE changes and not exhaust the topic. So this is definitely going to be a series or 3-parter, 4-parter over weeks. But one of the things I do want to talk about are the things that the really big changes outside of skills that I don't think necessarily everybody's talking about. The fact that Joker's Wild is now core. Let's talk about things that used to be optional now being core.
Yeah,
I love that it's core and that it's good. The GM gets it too.
Yeah, not only is Joker's Wild an amazing standout, and it's rewritten to where the GM gets some benefit of that, and it makes the game not just a runaway for the player characters. Mind you, for every additional player you have at the table, it gets that many additional times more likely that the players are going to get extra bennies versus the GM, because the GM really should only be drawing one card and all their characters acting in that one card. But you definitely run into a situation where the GM can get some extra bennies. What did it used to be called? The setting rule that went with No Mercy.
Blood and Guts.
Blood and Guts. Blood and Guts is now part of the core rules, and No Mercy just gives you a bonus when you're rolling damage. That is huge.
Yeah, No Mercy is basically a lawn for re-rolling damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, which they did change Elan in that aspect too now.
Yeah, Elan has been changed to where it only affects certain things, which they said that was kind of the goal all along, but now it's been brought in line with that. I'll be blunt. Like, outside of big, massive rule changes, the biggest change that I appreciate in the book that no one's talking about is the clarity. That book is so much better written than it has been in years past, with so many additional examples that really make it so the answer isn't always go play rules as written so you'll understand. You now actually understand the rules when you read them. You don't have to experience them and play to understand them the way you used to.
I think that's Clint trying to cut down his time on the forums, right?
I think actually constantly doing the forums is what got him to that point where he could write them.
Yeah, let's be very specific in how we're phrasing things. And yeah, no, I agree. A lot of it's written in a voice that's a lot more straightforward and clear cut. Absolutely.
I also like the fact that the way players earn bennies has been not necessarily tweaked as much as just the language surrounding it has certainly been modified so that you know that, yes, a player who tells a joke at the table that's not breaking the game. You know, it's not the guy who just goes her and references Monty Python in the middle of the game, or tells the story about what happened at work with the girl who fell down and her panties fell off that gets everybody giggling. No, it's the guy who actually has a character say something in character as a joke, gets a Benny. And then also goes on with, you know, the Bennies can still flow for good role play, with the small little caveat that includes role playing a hindrance, rather than just being this straight hindrance to Benny rule that existed previously. Now it's more a suggestion as that's an example of what good role play is and what should generate a Benny. So you don't have the players kind of redoing the same single role play thing over and over and over because they want to hit the Benny button.
I'll say this. One of the things I do like about core, a great change to the core rules, is the player Benny narrative mechanic. To where the player can go, hey, I'm going to spend a Benny and I'm going to take narrative control. Now, I'll say this. I think that's going to scare the shit out of a lot of the GMs. And the tendency is going to be not to use it. I'm going to say, by all means, I encourage you to embrace it. It will make you a better improvisational GM because you'll have to think on your feet about how to incorporate that into what's going on and make sense of what the players doing. And sometimes your players have great fucking ideas.
Right. And it's not a large narrative change. It specifically says in there to talk with the GM, or that it's the GM can override that. So it's basically, you know, I think of it as one of those, I needed a coil of rope in this cave and nobody specifically has it on their character sheet. Did anybody remember to go pick up a coil of rope? Well, give me a Benny and somebody remembered to go pick up a coil of rope.
Yes and no, because I mean that's that specific thing you just said is also the Scrounger edge.
That's true.
You know,
that's true.
That whole once a session you could just pull out the exact item that's needed because you forgot you had it.
Well, but if they have the Scrounger, then I wouldn't make them spend the Benny. But if nobody has the Scrounger and they want to do that, then they could spend a Benny on it.
Here's how I see that playing out, right? So you're let's say we're talking a medieval fantasy. It's you know, they're trying to get an audience with the king. They've been shut down with the persuasion roll, completely shut down. And one of the player characters go, well, we still get entrance into the court, and we're hobnobbing and socializing. And one of the player characters goes, oh, here's a Benny. I see somebody that I know intimately across the room who I think can get us an audience with the king.
So a great example of that, to use pop culture, because that's kind of our go-to on the show, is the show Firefly. There's an episode where they have to go to this really fancy party and meet this baron in a sash. And the player character in the form of the captain walks up and insults the man by not knowing that the sash indicates his rank. And so he just completely flubs his persuasion check and blows their chance to get this mission. And then the player spends the Benny to start a duel with the rival of the Baron that's there and win the Baron's approval by having gone through the duel. That, to me, is more where this happens, is the player characters have the ability to drop a Benny in the middle of the table and introduce a new scene or a new twist to the scene. It's not all of a sudden I've got equipment that lets me get out of a problem. No, that's MacGyver or Scrounger. It's not, oh, I did this thing 3 days ago that set this up. No, that's connections. That's other things that you should be adding to the role play of the game. But what this is more, I recognize the bodyguard, so therefore I can get us through security by having a conversation with him, and we'll all just walk together through the security barrier with him. It's little moments like that I think this is going to really shine in and show what all of a sudden as a GM, you just had your challenge for the evening turned on its head because the player drops a Benny and says, I turn and go through the door right here to the right that leads directly to the tarmac, and you go, but there's not a door that leads to the tarmac, Dave. I guess there is now.
Well, that's because Jared says, absolutely you fucking do. Oh, shit. All right, give me a second. There was no door to the tarmac. Fuck. Well, it leads down a set of stairs. It goes through a boiler room. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think it's a good addition to actually make it a codified rule that the players in your game have some narrative control, not to the extent that the GM does necessarily, but where they can insert narrative into the game.
Cooperative storytelling.
I don't know. So I was figuring, for those of you that have played Savage Rifts, they have something called Blaze of Glory. And what happens is when you die, you can, instead of taking your soak rolls, you can say, no, I'm going out in a blaze of glory. And the GM will give you bennies, reset everything, but you're going to die by the end of the session. You just have to figure out why. This narrative control with a Benny seems kind of like the Diet Coke version of that.
All right. I'm gonna say to you one thing, Dave. Blah 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 blah. Come up with some mundane but needed item. Boom, from the book.
Oh, the rule.
There you go.
Again, I don't think that's the best use of it because there's edges that do it. I'm not saying that you can't. I just don't think that. I would much rather see my players use MacGyver.
You sounded like my idea was a crappy idea.
All right, but he did say, in Dave's defense, the book does say mundane, not useful.
All right.
You pull a sandwich from your pocket.
So I prop a Benny and I find nail clippers. Great. That's not going to help us scale down to the side of this tower, Bob, but thanks for the input.
Well, then Bob's a dummy for spending a Benny on that.
All right. I've got one for you.
I will say this. While it is mundane, I would never allow a player to spend a Benny to get something that wasn't useful. Yeah. That is a dick GM move. If a player drops a Benny in the middle of the table and asks for something completely useless, it's your job to ask why they want that item to find out, are they building towards something they can use 10 minutes later, or is this literally like the brain fart of the moment where they're asking for something that's going to do jack all?
No.
And then you say, would you prefer to take that Benny back? I'll just let you have that.
Now, here, I'm going to throw something out here. Now, me as a player in a game with SWADE, with this rule in place, I'm going to use that to wage psychological warfare against the GM and my fellow players in the scene. Because what I'm going to do when we go, oh, did anyone forget to bring a rope? I'm going to look at Chris and go, hey, I'm going to spend a Benny. And while Chris and the GM thinks I'm going to say a rope, I'm going to go, I reach into my pants pocket and pull out a herring.
See, I fully expect there's going to be players out there who go, hey, did anyone bring a rope? And someone's going to throw a Benny in the middle of the table and go, no one brought a rope.
Right. Yeah, there's a dark side to that, guys. There's a dark side to players having narrative control.
Here's a good one. An assassin is sneaking up on you, and they have the drop a Benny. Say, I pull out a sandwich and begin eating it, and just before they're about to kill me and I spot them, I instinctively offer them some of the sandwich.
Or better yet, in great comedic style, I open and peel a banana and I throw the peel over my shoulder just as he's walking up. Mm-hmm. Now make an agility roll not to slip and fall, Assassin McGiger.
So, again, I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to what that can do. But, Chris, you said you actually have a Benny question.
Yeah, so one of the things I like, but I'm curious how you guys would handle it, and if it would, I'm going to use the word slow things down. I don't know that it will, but what do you guys think about the whole getting a new action card? I've kind of explained it to my players. I said, okay, you can get a new action card. Once I've dealt action cards to everyone, I'm going to count to 5 in my brain. If nobody has said anything by then, I'm moving on.
Yeah, I don't even know that I would count to 5. It's I've dealt the action cards out. The last card hits the table. Unless you're literally that last person, you should have spoke up by now. You know, you can clearly see that what you have in front of you is a 2 and that you want another card. Throw the Benny in and ask for another card.
Right.
You know, I think there's an aspect to that. Now, the flip side to that is if the last person being dealt in is the GM, maybe you give everybody a moment to look and consider. Though, personally, I really love the GM initiative card is dealt face down idea that Shane has floated.
Oh, yeah, I do that.
That is amazing because no longer do you have the, I don't have to go on hold because I know when I act in the round by comparison to the enemy.
Right. Yeah, and I always deal mine face down.
It says after all. I mean, I'm just going by what the rules say. It say after all cards are dealt. It doesn't specify when.
Right. Right. Just that after all the cards are dealt and any edges or hindrances have been resolved.
Like quick or level-headed or anything like that.
I'm just saying. I wonder if people are gonna slow things down by all of a sudden you're about to start the initiative and they're like, oh wait, no, I decided I want a new card.
See,
you got to put a time limit on that shit.
I don't think that's going to slow it down, because it takes a few seconds to deal somebody a new card.
Right, that's why I said I hate using the word slow.
Yeah, I think it can cause analysis paralysis.
There you go. That's a better way to put it.
Is it worth the Benny to get another draw and maybe still draw lower or equal to what I already have? I think that's the bigger risk. And you're going to run into, like, the player who's trying to count the cards and figure out, like, how many of things have been dealt so that they know, like, oh, well, I'll spend a Benny because there's at least a chance that the Joker is going to come up because we've seen half the deck and we haven't seen a Joker yet. Like, that's more where I would be concerned about this rule coming into play, is in those moments.
Well, I can tell you when, as a GM right now, when that rule's in play, I'm going to more than likely start dealing cards and going, everybody happy with their cards? Everybody want to spend a Benny to get a new one?
Yeah, the Benny bait moment.
I'm going to Benny bait players like crazy with that shit.
I guess that's a good point.
Yeah. Is everybody happy with that? And then go through the initiative order. I didn't even think about it, but that's probably the best way to handle it if you're a Benny bait style GM to begin with.
And then when they go drop the Benny and go, I want to remind you, we're getting ready to go into a combat. You have 2 Bennies left. Bennies are important for soaking wounds. You sure you want a better card? Because whatever card you draw with the Benny, you're stuck with. It doesn't say your choice of higher or lower. It says a new card.
Yeah. You could actually get a much worse card.
Okay, but that was my question. I was just reading that.
No.
Because I think
they get their choice of the cards they were dealt.
Really?
Of all
They
their
can
draws.
spend as many Bennies as they want.
It does. I didn't read far enough
their
down.
Choice of the cards.
They can. I didn't read far enough down.
Yeah,
I think people are definitely going.
Bad card.
I think people are definitely going to be investing in luck and great luck now because there is so much more that they can do with their bennies.
Oh, bennies are you're not gonna end a game with someone sitting with 8 bennies in front of them unless you've never put them in any challenging position at all. If you run an entire role play session where they never roll the dice, they never are in a challenging situation, and they never need to take control of the narrative, you're giving them ample control of the narrative, then you might have a session where it ends with stacks of bennies in front of everybody. Most of the time, people are going to be spending bennies, which is what these rules are intended to achieve. They want you to actually spend those. Now, here's my question about an imbalance that the new Benny rules makes. Wouldn't it be fair to let people spend a Benny to have more ammunition because they can spend a Benny to have more power points?
It's times like this I wish I hadn't shaved the beard because then it could be a lot more dramatic when I contemplate that.
I mean, I've long said
I agree. Power points are ammo. I agree with you. I don't
direct link to ammo.
I don't disagree. It kind of falls in that Benny narrative. Spend a Benny for narrative to do whatever. I would be okay with it. I mean, it's definitely going to be a GM call, a GM choice, but I'm really kind of okay with it. If you spend exchange bennies for PowerPoints, why not ammo?
It's narrative control, isn't it? Can't you just drop the Benny and say the guy who died next to me is using the same type of gun?
Oh, however you want to trap it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could certainly do that, and you know, as Chris said, you can narrative control as I can reach in my pack and pull out a mundane item. I pull out an extra clip of ammo. It certainly would apply, but I think that there's a specific rule there for spending a Benny to get back PowerPoints, and PowerPoints are the ammunition of any arcane user, whereas ammunition is a big part of equipment using characters. And I really do think that that's a 1-to-1 power question that arcane background just became a little more powerful. It was already more powerful, but it became a little more powerful by comparison to the others because it also has this ability to recharge mid-combat, and the guy with the machine gun just doesn't.
Yeah, and one Benny for 5 PowerPoints is pretty powerful too. I mean,
yeah,
especially when you start thinking like most of the spells at novice and everything are 1 or 2 PowerPoints. That's
well, and then you add in the ability to short yourself, where you cast powers without ample PowerPoints. You know, you get to a higher rank and you've got people casting, you know, decent powers without spending any PowerPoint. Well, I think it has a minimum you have to spend at least 1. But
not only that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can also cast the same spell multiple times or cast the same power multiple times.
Absolutely cast them with the same power multiple times.
So yeah, if I've got a 1 PowerPoint trick and I'm out of PowerPoints and I drop a Benny for 5 PowerPoints, that's a huge shift of power. I wouldn't hold it against a player characters like, hey, foul man. He gets to basically reload his magic gun with bullets by spending a PowerPoint, and I don't because I don't have an arcane background. I would give it to a player.
Hold on, I'm having to actually look something up in the rules now.
So JJ said, can I read JJ's thing?
Absolutely.
He said, yeah, the new edition doesn't say you shuffle when a Joker come up. Yes, check page 92.
Is it page 92?
On page 92, it says
Shuffle the deck after any round in which a Joker was dealt.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that is still there. I was like, does it?
It's weird. It's listed under shuffle.
Change?
Yeah, it's listed under shuffle, which is kind of a weird.
Yeah, it's actually under the action cards. It's actually under the action card setting.
Yeah,
instead of the
92.
Yeah, I was looking at it. I'm like, oh shit, it doesn't say that. So I had to go check because I wanted to make sure.
As soon as you posted it to chat, I was like, really?
All right, JJ, you got us all freaking out. All the hosts quickly go to their PDFs.
So now that we're kind of running out of questions from chat, I just want to ask, kind of across the board, which change did you see in the book that surprised you that you liked it? Because again, we've talked a lot about how there's that whole knee-jerk reaction to gamers hate change, and now this thing we're all so passionate about that we sacrifice huge swaths of our time and lives for it.
Well,
what was the thing that surprised you the most, that the change you liked? It is shaken.
I think it's I like the new shaken. I like the new shaken rules. I think the new shaken rules are great. I like that they made power modifiers on spells core.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite sure about that, but I really like that.
I think that's pretty cool. I was actually hoping, I'm with you, Chris. I like the modifiers on powers. I was kind of hoping that it'd be more in line with the Agents of Oblivion, but I am glad they're doing power modifiers.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it gives the player has to do a little more work to know what their powers do and what their modifiers do. You know, and that's on the players. That's not on the guy running the game, because he has too much to worry about. So I would say it's going to lead to people having to, you know, make sure they write out their powers, make a little index card for their powers with the modifier, so they can just grab those quickly and go, oh, well, I want to add 2 power points to make this from a medium to a large burst template. And I've already had people in my Deadlands game using it.
But that's something you hated when you first saw it, but then now like it.
I just did. I wasn't sure about it. I wasn't sure if it was going to be too much extra, extra stuff, slowing things down. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, just make an index card. So no, yeah. I didn't hate it. It was just something I wasn't sure about exactly how it was going to work. And now that I've seen it, you know, I'm even more of a fan.
To answer Dave's question, hold on one second. To answer Dave's question, the one thing that when I first read it in the book, I went, "What?" And no way, this is going to work. And I've turned the corner on.
New shaking.
No. We've had that conversation before. The statuses that they put in satisfied
distracted,
my
vulnerable.
initial. Well, because
I love those.
Let's rewind a little bit for anybody who hasn't watched the podcast for a while. When Shaken announcement was changed to, you no longer have to get a raise, just a success to unshake.
2 years ago, 3 years ago.
I may have had some gamer outrage about that topic. But my issue about it was that it took away a key tactical aspect from the game. If you were a tactical player and not so much a narrative high action combat player. That has since been remedied by the addition of the different statuses, distracted, vulnerable, and reintroducing different states back into the game. I'm fine with it. What threw me for a loop that I didn't like originally was, wait a minute, what happened to all the maneuvers? Why did you get rid of this maneuver and that maneuver and this maneuver that everybody can do and tie it to things? Specifically, a lot of the new social skills for taunt, intimidation, test of wills. I like the way that things have been rolled up a lot into edges. That used to be just open for everybody. Any player character could do it. Now there's actual edges that give you bonuses to kind of do it. You kind of have to get that edge to really pull it off.
It answers that common question of what makes my character different from your character. The whole specialization thing that people were always complaining that Savage Worlds characters were too alike because it was too open as to what you could do. I think the inclusion of a lot of these things being tied directly to an edge kind of solves that problem. And with what you were saying, Chris, with the power modifiers, as great as the power modifiers are, I agree. At first, I was like, is this going to be too many things for the player to keep track of in play? But what really is interesting about that change is the automatic addition of trappings having an effect. If you're casting a fireball and you've said that it's a ball of fire, it always sets the target on fire. It always causes flammable things to combust. It follows the rules of fire because you've said it's fire. Just like if you said it's electricity, it follows the rules of electricity. That the trapping effect is automatic, and that's not where the player is having to spend extra points to make fire fiery. Now they're being able to spend extra points to make fire do damage over time, or to make it do the bypassing of the armor, or to make it a larger burst, things like that. That to me is really interesting about that power modifier change.
So it kind of brings up a point, and this is something I've been thinking about. Readying actions. You can ready actions now, right?
Well, you can always go on hold.
I know, you could always go on hold, but you can ready actions now, if I'm reading that right. Is it possible if you say have the healing power, you could ready that so that if you get incapacitated, you automatically roll to heal a wound?
Now, is that in the arcane backgrounds?
Yeah, where are you getting this readied action?
Yeah,
Let me find it. I'm looking through the PDF. This could take a while.
Okay. Well, while you do that, I'll kind of answer my own question. So I honestly think one of the things that first caught me off guard and then was a fairly surprising change that I liked a lot is the new incapacitation rule. The fact that as soon as the fourth wound happens, pass-fail doesn't matter on your incapacitation roll. Your character is unconscious until one wound is healed. Period. End of sentence. End of story. That character is out of the fight. They can't take free actions. They can't lay there and talk their friends through what to do in the combat and give tactical instructions. That character is knocked the fuck out. And then they don't get to come back until there's one wound healed. When I first saw it, and I think the first iteration of it was all wounds had to be healed, and that seemed too extreme. That somehow your character was knocked into this massive coma until they fully healed. It seemed a bit much. But now that it's one wound and they've really kind of dialed that in, it makes so much sense that a knockout blow is a knockout blow even if you survived it. Did you find it, Dustin?
I'm still looking.
Oh no, his kidnappers gave him a cracker.
My one ration per day.
Bread and water, but they didn't tell you the bread's all dried out crackers. So that
there was a sticky note on it that said, "Here's dinner, pig dog."
Mm-hmm.
And then what was it? Somebody had mentioned in chat about the removal of charisma. I know Dustin really hated that when they first announced it. I don't know that he's turned the corner on it yet, but I actually really like the change, and I like the new mechanic that it created. The auto reroll on a failure based on an edge. You have charisma, so you automatically reroll the first failed persuasion check, regardless of whether or not you have bennies to spend. It's just this auto thing that you're so specialized, you get another chance at that. That is such a great mechanic, and I fully expect to see that pop up in a lot of other places in the form of setting edges.
Yeah, I like the fact that because they got rid of charisma, you're no longer at a negative charisma for taking hindrances when you're not a persuasion character to begin with, when you're not trying to play a face character. And then the other social edges they put in there, oh my God, make persuasion like almost like fighting as far as the kind of damage it can do. Like, to basically fluster an opponent to the point where they intimidate the entire room of people because you have the edge instead of just one person. I like what they did with the I'm a fan.
and the work the room and stuff.
Yep. I'm a fan of the removal of charisma, just a flat across the board.
So while Dustin's still looking, because it looks like he's still looking,
I have
asked that he's on the fence about the 3 actions per turn rather than the unlimited actions. How do people feel about that one?
I'm good with it, and here's why. Because most players are not going to take... I think players hit a defeatist wall when they start calculating negatives. Like, okay, well, I can take 8 actions, and then there's this kind of like brain lock on, wait a minute, how many negatives is that to everything? And they just see that as a huge wall of negatives. For example, when we played with Pat originally, right? The whole idea of taking a -2 for doing more than one thing, totally against it. No, never. That's stupid. I'm setting myself up to fail until...
The thing I heard the most often is that's a 50% chance to fail. Because he always thought of the -2 versus the target number of 4 and never thought about how that plays in with the other bonuses he's getting from edges and skills and the die type and all of that.
Right. So until that player witnessed another player taking an aggressive action against him in a game where they went, okay, first I'm going to wild attack, then I'm going to intimidate you, then I'm going to push you prone, and then I'm going to beat you. So I'm taking 4 actions. and we're going, oh my God, that's a -6 to everything. The Pat was like, haha, go ahead. And then he, the wild attack eliminates one and it worked. He was like, holy shit, how did I just take 2 wounds? That should never work. So I think it's a natural kind of instinctive limiter to put in there. I mean, really, do you want to keep track of every character trying to take 8 actions on top of the game? And on top of that, I don't think players are naturally inclined to do it.
Fast, furious fun.
I think it puts a cap on it. Absolutely. A negative, -4.
Right. And you can do that quickly at the table.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to take 3 actions, it's always a -4. You can just boom. It's real quick at the table.
Yeah.
You're not spending so much time.
It's always a -4.
Yeah, and I think it just will help speed things up. I think that I actually think people will be more willing now to do multiple actions because, seeing that, I can take up to 3 actions a turn, and they're thinking, okay, well, these 3 things I could do. So it might help people do it more often. I don't know.
Well, I
could just be talking out my ass.
I love the other half of the change, which is that I can take the same action multiple times.
Yes.
In the same round. So I've got a semi-automatic gun. I can pull the trigger more than once per round. Like, oh my fucking God. I can finally use a semi-automatic pistol the way it's meant to be used. Really?
Right.
So let me ask this. Wound cap.
I like wound cap. I think it's great.
Rule now?
It's a setting rule.
Not a part of the core rules, though, right? I think a lot of people think it is because it was introduced in Flash Gordon.
But it's a official setting rule in core.
It is.
Way, like Blood and Guts used to be.
Right.
So I don't want to say it's not part of core, but I do definitely think that it has a place. I like that it's a setting rule and not automatic, though.
Right. So you may still have to soak 8 wounds to stay out of incapacitation in a game.
Although I honestly think it'll go the same way Joker's Wild and Blood and Guts went.
Yep.
That the next edition we get, that'll become an automatic part of core. And I would not be too surprised if by the time we progress from 2.1 to print, that there's at least an internal discussion that happens at PEG as to whether or not it should just be a core rule. Because it kind of makes sense that you shouldn't have to soak more damage than your body can actually take.
But I do love the idea, the thrill of, oh my God, the Savage Worlds just happened all over the damage. That's 6 wounds. You're done. Hold on. No, I soaked it all except for 2 wounds in your face. I still like that can still be a component of the game.
Did you find your question?
Apparently, I was mistaken because I did a full-on search about rendering and preparing actions, and I could not find it anywhere.
I know that exists in some other systems. I did not think it existed anywhere in
I've been reading up on a lot of like Dark Heresy and Wrath and Glory, so apparently I ventured into
it found its way in your Savage filter.
I must have ventured into the Dark Imperium for a minute there.
We touched on it for a moment, but Jody Connor asked, how well does SWADE cover trappings? Amazingly.
I like the one sentence that says trappings do matter. With the do being italicized.
Yeah, I think if I have one complaint, it's that I don't think Clint and company there at PEG are fully on board with the movement in the community to trap everything. That I can take and trap lock picking as my mage character doing, wiggling their finger and manipulating the lock. They've pushed back a bit on that. That officially trappings are automatically applied to powers, and that's where they exist.
Right, and that they don't change.
They can't do it, but they certainly aren't on board with it the way the community seems to be lately. But with that said, I really love the changes they made to trappings.
All right. Well, that I think we're pretty much near the end of this this installment of Let's Talk Suede. So before we close it down, we'll go ahead and make an Atomic Ninja Studios announcement. Dropping this weekend on Drive-Thru RPG, you can pick up a supplement including 21 archetype characters for Suede, built for Suede, notated with how the points were spent. So if you want to make changes, you can easily do so. And probably the most interesting, mind-bending part of this is they are raceless. They are not automatically human, and you can apply any racial template you would like to them easily. So with that said, it's the name of the product is Atomic Ninja Presents Adventure Archetypes. Drops this weekend on Drive-Thru RPG. Go check it out. It is not a pay-what-you-want product. Ladies and gentlemen, we're like drug dealers. You get the first one, you get the first taste for free. Everything else you must pay for. So with that said,
but to be fair, it's the same price other archetype products have been. It's about twice the size that most of them have been in the past. We really wanted to hit this with a lot of archetypes across the board, but it's still going to be that same $9.99 that you've paid at the end of pretty much every Kickstarter since ETU, I think.
Pretty much.
Where it's a $9.99 secondary supplemental project with it's got its own art. It was amazingly laid out by Carl Kiesler. It looks really pretty, guys. You guys are gonna love this when you see it.
The other thing about it too is it covers a lot of different tropish archetypes across multiple genres. So have at it. Until next time.
It's not just a fantasy book. It's not going to just give you the thief and the cleric and the rogue and move on. No.
So with that said, until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, and Dustin. Good luck on your release. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep rolling and stay savage.